Thanks very much for the invitation, John, or Prof. Lazarus. It's very nice to be able to speak to an audience, both one in front of me here at F26 seminar room and also to everybody around the country. So I know it's 7 o'clock or 7:03, and Neethas like to start on time, or certainly I do. And I know a lot of you got work to get to, so we'll get straight into it. So I always like to start just with a disclaimer that you know where I am, where I'm coming from. So I've been part of the SASA, which is the African Society of Anesthesiologists, their private practice business unit, since 2008. I'm one of only 2 people that have been there uninterrupted since then, since we founded it. I've been on SASA Council and EXCO, and then importantly, I suppose, in the context of this talk, from 2016 to 2018, I was a SASA president, and that's when most of the NHI submissions and also the health market inquiry submissions were made. And that's going to become very relevant later on. Then I'm part of a medical advisory group. We started this in COVID, and we've carried on now since then. And obviously MPS is one of the largest indemnifiers in the country. They want to know what's going on, because the liabilities in the state are going to be transferred to the liabilities to everybody if NHI comes to fruition. And then, as John said, I've been with Southern Anesthetics coming up for just over 18 years now. I'm not CEO anymore, but I'm still one of the, I'd say, senior management. Just important that for all of these things, I don't get paid anything. This is all on a volunteer basis. So this talk is about understanding NHI, protecting our profession, and it's about sifting through the noise. So, you know, there's a lot of paranoia about NHI. There's a lot of, should we say, truth. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of fake news. So I think in one lecture, I just want to go through what are the facts. I'll show you the references. You can fact check me for everything, and I'll tell you what the state of play is at the moment for NHI. Good. So these are the sort of questions that came from our SASA members, and you can substitute the Urology Society in there. And it's just 3 slides of the questions that people have been asking me over the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm sure these are the questions that you as registrars and you as specialists will also want to know. And it doesn't matter if you're in public or private sector, NHI is going to affect everybody. So these are sort of things I'm going to answer today. What's the time frame? What are SASA or the Urology Society been doing? What are the legal frameworks? For example, what's happening with contracts with NHI? How's NHI going to roll out? How's it going to impact hospitals, governments, or jurisdicted persons? How do they set prices? How to negotiate prices? Global fees? What's the role of medical schemes in the future NHI? Importantly, there's a lot about accreditation of practices in hospitals. Is anesthesia or urology in their own silo, or are we discussing amongst other surgical societies? Where are we currently with NHI? There's a lot of court actions happening at the moment. 2 weeks ago, Urology Society was part of a group that won a court action. I don't know if any of you know that. And what's up with this new Gazette 52111? Okay, all will be revealed. So I'm going to start in the beginning, or in the beninging. How does any policy go from an idea to law? So it starts off with an idea, and you can be in any political affiliation, whatever it is. You decide, I want to do this. You then need to take it to a political party. They come up with a party manifesto or a proposal. And if you get enough support within Parliament, it gets to what's called the Green Paper stage. So the Green Paper is just a piece of legislation that's put out there either in a government gazette form or an invitation from Parliament, and members of the public are allowed to comment. That then goes to the next stage of legislation, which is the White Paper, which is just before it goes into Parliament, where you would hope then that the comments that have come in from civil society, from professional organizations, have shaped the policy slightly to the better. Then it goes to Parliament, and there's obviously, we've got 2 houses, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, and there it has to be passed by a simple majority, so 50 plus 1%, before it goes to the President. And the president himself has got three options. He can either sign it into law, or he can say, you know what, I'm worried about conflicts of interest here. I'm worried about the conflict with the Constitution. He can send it back to Parliament to be redebated. Okay? Or if he's worried about constitutional amendments, he can send it to the Constitutional Court, and they can decide the constitutionality of the act before he signs it into law. So there are three options that the president could do, and you can go onto the Parliament website and you can see all the bills that have been passed, all the bills that are coming, who's in the white paper stage, the green paper, and where we are, and then what the president did with every single law. So what happened with NHI? Well, 1993 was the first time we heard about it. Cheryl Carolus mentioned it as an ANC policy. Jacob Zuma, remember him? He came into power in 2007 on the back of saying, we're going to roll out NHI in this country. Green paper came out in 2011, the white paper. Then in 2018, it went to the National Council of Provinces. As we know, it came to the president in December 2023. And then he signed it into law, remember, 2 weeks before the May election. Okay, which perhaps cost the ANC the national election. So when was there an opportunity to comment? The SASA did this, and so did the urology societies at the green and white paper stage, and obviously when it went to the president. But unlike any other piece of legislation in South Africa, from the ANC policy to the green paper was unchanged. From the green paper to the white paper stage, despite all objections, despite multiple admissions, the policy was unchanged. From the white paper to when it went to Parliament, and despite the presidential invite or a summit where he invited all parties, it went from white paper to Parliament unchanged. When it came from Parliament to the president to sign, it was unchanged. So there was a massive political middle finger to everybody in the country about what the objections were. This was an ANC policy that came from its core all the way to the president unchanged. But there's more. So obviously, if you want to roll out NHI, there's a lot of other things you've got to do. There's the Office of Health Standards Compliance. There was a health market inquiry. Remember that our previous health minister, or he's now the current health minister, but when he was back in 2012, Aaron Motsoaledi, he thought that there was collusion within the private practice. He thought that the prices were too high, and he launched a health market inquiry. This took 4 years, 197 million rand. Okay, and they found there was no collusion in private practice. But there were a whole lot of recommendations that came out of that. Then there's state liability changes. These are all these different amendments came about from 2012 to 2019. And our society and all the others all made submissions to this. Okay. For the NHI to take place, there had to be some ethical rules changed within the Health Professions Council. So you can start, this is an ethics talk. You can debate the ethics of changing the ethical rules to suit the NHI, and whether it should perhaps be the other way around. So SARS involvement, we have made 14 NHI-related submissions in a 12-year period. This pointable work, the most recent ones is today is the deadline for the Gazette 52111 submission. I'll get in a little bit later on, but the urologists have submitted one as a SASA today. As a volunteer organization, we obviously give our time, but you need legal backing and you need legal advice, and you need to do things properly. And it's a couple of 100,000 rand of legal fees for our society per submission. So we've spent millions, as has every other society or every other organization in the country. And most of these have just been literally thrown into the dustbin. So from our society, these are just some of the names you might recognize. Natalie Zimmerman was our previous CEO. Lizelle Brits is our current CEO. I remember our previous CEO was so excited when she got invited. This is 2018 to the Presidential Health Summit. She thought she was going to make a difference. She didn't know that every single submission, including at this health summit, was ignored, and that the president had decided 3-4 years before he signed it into law that he was actually going to ignore everybody's submission. So I just want to show you some important submissions that have been made. So this is one that was made in December 2023. So this is now after the NHI bill was passed by Parliament and it went to the President. And it's important that SAPPF, of which urologists are part of SAPPF, and SASA, and a whole coalition of medical practitioners representing 25,000 private and public healthcare workers, all petitioned to the President to please reconsider signing this document into law. And importantly, they said that there were challenges and that he should send it back to the National Assembly. They said that there were constitutional irregularities, and they said that there were 5 instances when His Excellency the President has previously referred legislation back to the National Assembly, and that we are imploring him to do so. Obviously, he ignored that. But this piece of legislation is going to become important later on when I talk about the court rulings. Because when you have a submission, and this goes for anything, and you tell the party, like the government, that this is where you're wrong on these and these and these bases. If later on you go to court and the judge finds in your favor, he can make a cost order, which means he can say, not only were you wrong, government, but these people that are suing you told you you were wrong 5 years ago, and they told you why you were wrong. So you're actually wasting these people's time. So I'm not only finding in favor of you, but you have to pay the legal costs as well. Okay, that's what happened to the SAPPF court order 2 weeks ago. Okay, urologists, you're part of SAPPF. They fought the President on signing this thing into power. They said that it was unconstitutional and he should have known that. And the judge found in SAPPF's favor, and they ordered a cost order. But you would never have got that cost order, and you would never have had an opportunity to take the President to court unless you've made the submission. Do you guys understand why it's important to do all of these things? Okay. So then there was also urologists underneath this combined together in what's called a Universal Health Access Coalition. This was in December last year, where there was a new healthcare reform framework proposed, and they met in person with the President. And it's basically a consensus-driven proposal outlining practical solutions to improve access. I don't think there's anybody in South Africa who doesn't want to improve access to healthcare. Okay, but there's some very good low-hanging fruits that you can use. There is a fantastic private healthcare, and you can go into public-private partnerships. There's capacity within private healthcare to do more. And then you have the public sector that is on its knees. Okay, that needs help and needs refurbishment and needs urgent attention. So just to show you that the urologists are in this coalition, as are the anesthetists, as are representatives of 25,000 different healthcare professionals in the public and the private sector. So I think it's important just to pause before we go into the NHI as to what this entity is, the Office of the Health Standards Compliance, because this gets referred to quite a few times within the NHI bill. So SASA made a submission back in 2012. This was before it was sort of too politicized, and they basically took the SASA practice handbook of safe practices within an operating theatre, within a hospital, and they accepted everything. But the Office of Health Standards Compliance, it's supposed to be an independent body, but it is housed within the Department of Health. And what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to investigate private hospitals and government hospitals, and they need to go through a couple of hundred hospitals a year, and then they need to rate them as to how safe they are and where they are in terms of their compliance. Unfortunately, it has become a little bit politicized, and since 2017, we haven't had all the granular detail, but in 2017, they found that only 6 out of the 696 government hospitals and clinics that expected passed the department's own health norms and standards to achieve an 80% pass rate. Now, in private practice, if you fail, you get 6 months, and if you haven't rectified everything and they come and re-inspect, your hospital is closed down. How many hospitals have been closed down in the last 10 years in the public sector? 0. Okay, yet less than 1% will pass the Office of Health Standards Compliance own pass mark. It gets worse. 26% of public facilities inspected were critically non-compliant and 36 completely non-compliant. So, unsurprisingly, between March 2015 and 2018, the medical negligence claims against the state increased from 28 to 80 billion rand. Okay, where are we at the moment? It's over 100 billion rand. And, you know, if you are a company preparing a list of annual financial statements, okay, you need to say what your liabilities are. You need to say, if all of you here have got some debt, maybe not John, but anyway, you've all got some debt, okay? And if somebody were to see how solvent you are, they'll see what is your income, what are your assets, what is your debt, what is the money that you owe. So if you know that you've got somebody suing you for over 100 billion rand, according to NPS, what you know about is only the tip of the iceberg. There's probably double that out there that hasn't come to fruition yet. So our budget minister, our health minister, who's going to be tabling budget 3.0, he should be mentioning the liability to the state coffers of 100 billion rand that's coming from malpractice claims, but it's not mentioned, and it's not going to be mentioned in any of the budgets. And to try and put that sort of number into perspective, the VAT hike that they wanted to do, okay, of 1%, would have achieved 25 billion rand a year into the fiscus. So if all these claims come to fruition in 1 year, you're going to have to hike the VAT by 4% in 1 year just to cover the medical malpractice claims against the state. I see a lot of shaking heads. It gets worse. It gets paid from the health budget. So that is why there's, 1,800 junior doctors that can't be employed in the country, okay? Because if you're in the Eastern Cape, you're paying a couple of billion rand, okay, in malpractice claims from previous disasters. So now you have no money to pay for doctors and nurses for the next financial year, which makes the problem even worse. Okay, so let's go into what's in the NHI bill. So the NHI bill is basically 2 pages of headings. It's a 97-page document. It's very, very short. It's very big on ideas, but very small on detail. So they will say grand things in a 1 line, but they will not explain how it's going to happen or what's going to happen. And there is 1 chapter, okay, about the provision of health. Everything else is political. Okay, population coverage, how they're going to establish the fund, the powers of the fund, who's going to be on the board. They're all obviously appointed by the health minister, who's going to be on the CEO, all these committees, these advisory committees, all appointed by the health minister. There's a little bit here about accreditation and contracting of services, and then complaints, finance, miscellaneous. So there's very, very little about how the actual provision of care is going to take place. And it's not going to take long to go through what these things are and what they have said. So first of all, it's the funding model. So at the moment, we have on a national basis, we have resource allocation. Then every province is basically given a budget. Okay, so it's out of the whole healthcare budget of 256 billion. The Western Cape, Gauteng gets about 65. The Western Cape is, I think, 28 to 30 billion rand. And they can decide how they're going to use that money in the public sector and then on a more local level. So your funding for your Groote Schuur Hospital, where I'm at the moment, comes from the Western Cape Department of Health budget. Okay, but this is what the NHI says. The NHI says that everything is centralized. All the money from all the taxes and everything comes to one entity, which is not established yet. That's at national level. And from there, they purchase public sector health, both at a provincial and a local level, and they purchase private healthcare for the country. So if you think that your hospital is perhaps not so good on funding or on administration, okay, it's only going to get worse if everything gets nationalized. Can you imagine trying to get your pension money out of a national funding model? So the proposal from SASA and many people is that you should have some sort of strategic purchasing for catastrophic cover at a national level, and you go into public-private partnerships, but you must still have sub-regional or regional or provincial funding so that those people can be accountable for what's happening in their specific province. And that's why, the Western Cape has been petitioning, as has every other organization, and that's why the DA has got as their red line in the sand for the government and national unity, NHI funding model for them is their red line in the sand, because they're not going to allow that provinces that are run by the DA at the moment, their funding gets taken away to a national government. So if you want to change the constitution, and this is where the constitutionality changes, if you want to change the constitution in South Africa, you need a 2/3 majority in Parliament, and you need 6 out of the 9 provinces from National Council of Provinces to all agree. So at the moment, the ANC's got 30%. They're not going to change the constitution, and they weren't going to change the constitution even with 50%. So there's a constitutional crisis with the NHI, which we've been telling the president for years. And this is all going to come out in the next few months or weeks as these court cases start piling up for the president. And eventually he's going to have to send the NHI bill back to the National Council of Provinces and to Parliament so that it can be teased out, that we sort out this constitutional mess before we go forward. And obviously, whatever comes out of Parliament then is going to be very different to how it looks at the moment, because you're going to need a majority in Parliament to pass anything further on NHI. What do they say about services? And it looks like the services that are going to be acquired for the NHI, there's going to be no difference between public and private. So if you look at 3B, I can't have a pointer, there we go. In the case of specialist and hospital services, so that's you in government practice here at Grooterskloof, payments must be all-inclusive and based on the performance of the healthcare service provider. Okay, and emergency medical services obviously are capped at a case-based fee and adjustments made for severity. So what does that mean? What does an all-inclusive payment based on an outcome mean? Does that mean that if you have a prostate cancer and you come into a hospital for cure, are they going to only pay you once they've seen the 3-month follow-up or the 3-year follow-up, or once the patient's discharged from hospital? Okay, and who's going to measure this outcome and decide whether it's good enough to be paid for? And what if you do a prostate operation and there's a complication and maybe the patient doesn't make it home? Are you just not going to get paid? So if it's based on performance, who's determining it and who's measuring it? And there's no timeline. So if any of you have done any private practice, you might have done some work for the road accident fund or workman's compensation. In private practice, we wait 3 to 5 years for those payments to come from a national entity. Okay, if we work for something like Discovery, 2 weeks later we paid. So there's no timeline given as to how payment is going to be done. And that might be impacting the public sector as well. So what they also say is that once the National Health NHI has been fully gazetted, medical aids can only offer complementary cover. So if the state is providing care for a specific entity like cesarean sections or kidney stones, then you can only use your medical aid for things that are not covered by the state sector. And that's obviously causing a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. Then the bill also defines the role of a national health information system. So according to this bill, no health access is going to happen unless there's an IT system that's capturing everything. So some of you might work at this UCT private academic hospital. You use Careon, okay, which is Netcare's sort of hospital-based IT system. I mean, it's been down, what, 3 times in the last month? And that's just looking at just one hospital group. Discovery Health is probably the best administrator in the country. They only have sort of outpatient records. They don't have a national database of everybody that is on their scheme. But here it says that we're not going to roll out NHI until there's a health information system that's going to cost billions that covers the entire country. Right. Moving on to, that's basically it. It's about healthcare provision within the NHI. Those are the only 3 slides. So what about the health market inquiry? So as I said, 197 million. It took 4 years. It was launched after Aaron Motsoaledi had this hypothesis that private healthcare was too costly. And there were a raft of recommendations done in 2019. And he's had 6 years to try and implement those, but he hasn't. But he has chosen part of them in what's called this new Gazette 52111, which was actually issued by the Department of Trade, Industry and Commerce, which is the DTIC. So Parks Tau, who's the Minister of Department of Trade, Industry and Commerce, he gave on the 14th of February a nice little Valentine's Day present to all the healthcare practitioners in the country. He issued this Gazette. And this Gazette is basically a block exemption. So it means that all the practitioners in the country can then negotiate together. Because at the moment, if we discuss fees, it's anti-competitive, and we can be given a fine of 10% of our annual turnover for the year if we start talking about it. But they've used selectively part of the recommendations from the health market inquiry, but they're using the Department of Health to fill all the posts within that framework. It's not an independent body. It's only targeting practitioners, so it's not looking at hospital groups, it's not looking at funders, it's not looking at big pharma, and it's not looking at the device companies, which are probably 90–95% of the cost of any healthcare intervention in the country. The practitioners are very, very small component. The whole exemption or gazette is about setting maximum tariffs, not reference tariffs, a maximum tariff for PMB and non-PMB conditions. But it says anybody with a conflict of interest cannot partake in this exercise. So if you're a healthcare professional, and obviously the tariffs are impacting on you, you are excluded from the process. So that is just, I mean, it's unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's irrational. Also, they decide that they're going to have consensus on management protocols. Not only management protocols, but devices, pharmacology, and treatment strategies. So first of all, the word consensus is irrational because nobody gets consensus. Even in your family, you know, deciding which Netcare movie or not Netcare, Netflix movie to watch on a Friday night. You don't get consensus. In the end, it's a vote. So how are you going to get consensus amongst practitioners around the country on anything, especially management protocols, devices, and pharmacology? And it almost sets up failure that the Department of Health's appointees from the minister can just decide. But it's very, very dangerous to have a Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Health deciding on management and treatment protocols. You know, you have a patient that's got cardiac failure. There can be a host of reasons why they're on cardiac failure. Ischemia, viral, you know, hypertension, you name it. The treatment protocols, okay, if you're going to go evidence-based, there's obviously diuretics, there's maybe some ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and then you might progress to maybe pacemakers, and the end might be a heart transplant. But if you've got another entity that's not medical, that's not evidence-based, that's deciding this is what we're going to do for treatment, okay, there's a risk then that you as the practitioners, who are obviously governed by the courts and by the Health Professions Council as to what you should be doing in terms of delivering of your healthcare, are going to get told by the Department of Trade or Industry, this is the only things that you can use in your treatment protocol. So for urology, if you got a stone, well, they'll say, okay, you can hydrate the patient, give them pain relief, and maybe you can use extracorporeal shock or lithotripsy, but I'm sorry, lasers are going to be too expensive. You know, this is where we're going when a government decides on the treatment protocol for its citizens. So every single society in the country is making a submission, and the deadlines are today. Urologists are part of a greater group of SAPPF. Yeah, we'll see what happens. There's more than a dozen different submissions. And as I said, you know, maybe 20 minutes ago, if you have to make the submission, because otherwise, if the department goes ahead with this gazette and you want to take them to court, you have no basis to take them to court unless you've proven that you've shown them why it is wrong. So our submission from SASA, and I'm sure all the others, is based on the fact that this is, first of all, unconstitutional. It's unlawful. The Department of Trade, Industry and Commerce has no lawful statute, and he's gone beyond the powers of what the minister can do in establishing this. And we've listed, half our submission is all the irrational things that the minister has come up with. So we're hoping that they withdraw the gazette completely, but if they don't, then we're going to go to court and we're going to block it. So it is all about politics. And these are the three main players. You've got, top left, you've got Nicholas Crisp. He's been in the department for 20 plus years. He's the author of the NHI bill. And earlier this year, he said it's going to take decades for NHI to roll out. Now, decades implies plural, that's at least 20 years. But that's not stopping him trying to get funding to start rolling out this expensive IT process. Now, at the moment, they're not having any funding from NHI. So our Treasury Minister has told Aaron Matsualedi, give me a budget for NHI and maybe I'll think about it. But nowhere in the current budget is any increase in health for the NHI. Then we have Andan Pillay, who was quite famously involved in the Digital Vibes saga. Remember him? 150 million rand of fruitless expenditure, which got Mkhize suspended. He was given a temporary suspension, fined, demoted for a couple of months, and then he's now been promoted. He is now head of the Department of Health. And then we have our minister, who in the 9 years that he has been part of cabinet and presided over the health department, there's been an absolute destruction of the public health sector. And he really, I mean, in any normal situation, he shouldn't be still in his job. But, you know, as I tell everybody, 3 more years. Okay, it's 3 more years before our next general election. And if you think it's going to take decades, as in more than 20 years for NHI to take place, we have elections in this country every 4 years. There's going to be 5 changes of government before you're going to have NHI being rolled out. Okay. And what are the chances that any one of these individuals is still going to be around after 5 cycles of change in government? Okay. But that's not stopping them, in the meantime, trying to destroy private practice, which is what they're trying to do with this Gazette 52111. So we're playing the long game, but then we're also putting out fires as they're coming almost on a monthly basis. So what is the solution? I think the solution is to lobby. And for those who don't know the word lobby, it talks about a body of people seeking to influence legislation, and it comes from, you know, the British Houses of Parliament, gathering of members in Parliament in the hallways or the lobbies, and you talk to people. I mean, you need to speak to captains of industry when you're next at a braai and somebody asks you that's non-medical, what's happening with NHI and what's this Gazette all about? That's your time to be a lobbyist and to tell them, you know, this is what's happening in NHI, and this is actually what it's all about. And we're not against universal access to healthcare. We're just against having a government controlling all the money at a central level and deciding on how we're going to treat our patients. Okay, and all of you should be working on your elevator pitch. You know what elevator pitch is? You get into an elevator, you're sitting next to the president of the country, you got 30 seconds to tell, oh, you're a doctor. What do you think about NHI? Work on your elevator pitch. Okay, that's what you're going to need to do. And then the other thing that all of you can do is to support your societies. If you're not the one that's going to give up hours of your day, okay, to sit with lawyers and to go through submissions and make sure they're fine, then at least you can pay your society fees. So at least they can pay for the lawyers that can do all of this, because it's in all of our interests that you guys are part of your societies. And it's all about the law, actually. It's politics and the law. So I'm just going to go through some of the legal challenges. So Business Unity South Africa is working with the minister, and they're working with the president, and you can see how he's changing a few things, because, you know, without big business in South Africa, you don't have growth and you don't have job creation. Okay, so Mercedes-Benz, for example, have told the president, and they've made it public, that if they don't have good healthcare for their workers in East London, they're pulling out of South Africa, because any company that relies on a healthy workforce is obviously invested and wants to know about healthcare for that workforce. And if you don't have good healthcare for your workforce, then you're going to move your company to a country that does have good healthcare for their workforce. So business is putting a lot of pressure. The DAs also, they haven't taken the NHI to court yet, but they've publicly said what their red line is, and they are working internally within the national government unity to try and change a lot of the thought process around NHI. Then the funders, the Hospital Association and Board of Healthcare funders, they took the president to court. That ruling was in May, and then SAPPF and SAMA's case hasn't been heard yet, but the judge heard the Board of Healthcare funders and SAPPF's case together because they were very, very similar. And the ruling was 10 days ago in SAPPF's favor. And basically what SAPPF and Board of Healthcare funders asked is they wanted the record of decision. So they wanted to know, what did the president use? What legislation? What was his background? How did he come to the decision to sign the NHI into law when he knew it was unconstitutional? So the president said, well, this is a constitutional matter, and the court ruled, no, it's not. And he has to provide, and the deadline is today. So if he hasn't provided, he's within contempt of court. Okay, and then we go to the next process. Or he's got today to decide, I'm going to appeal. Okay, and then we go on to the next phase. But basically, once he provides the record of decision, we believe there's grounds that you can then send that record back to Parliament so that it can be changed for the future. Then the Hospital Association, they've made a lot of noise, but they're prepared to go to court on the NHI. And then obviously there's Solidarity. There's a whole lot of other people that are taking the NHI to court. And so far, every single case against the NHI, whether it be just the certificate of need or the one that was ruled last year, every single one was made in favor of the plaintiff with a cost order. So we as taxpayers are not only paying for the legal fees of government, but then we're paying indirectly for the legal fees of those that are winning. And then, as I said, Gazette 52111, watch this space. I'm sure, based on the history of what the government has done in the past, they're just going to ignore every single submission, and they're just going to press ahead, and then there's going to be a court action coming their way. So I think I'll just conclude, John. I think I'm within time with 4 minutes to spare. It's Charles Darwin's not the strongest of the species that survive, but all the most intelligent. It's the one that can adapt to change and lives within the means and available and works cooperatively against common threats. I think as healthcare providers, we've had to adapt a lot in these last few years. But I think one thing that has been good is that all associations are talking more and more with each other, combining with each other. I think if we all know, I mean, I've chatted to your president, Karl-Heinz Yeller. I know that he's made a submission on this. We can't collude on those submissions, but I just, you know, we know that everybody is, but we know that all healthcare practitioners have made a submission for this latest gazette, and we are definitely working together. So the take-home message is support your societies because they're doing great work. Okay. You want to turn the lights on? Maybe takes a bit. Yeah.
Dirk, it's been an absolute privilege to have hosted you here this morning. What an exceptional talk, and the heavy lifting you've done over a long, long period of time. It's truly astounding. So I think we've been very lucky this morning. I see we've got about 70 people online listening this morning, and it'd be nice to open it up to the floor to engage with Dirk on some of these matters. Let's just see. Sometimes there are questions that pop up. I wonder if there's anyone in the room who might have a question. Yeah, let's get you.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Dirk. Excellent talk. Very interesting. Lots of food for thought there. I mean, obviously, we've got our own views on it as healthcare workers. And I mean, we just hear what we see in the media. Obviously, the media can be dictated. You mentioned the BHF and those sort of things. And the medical aids, I assume, would this be the end of medical aids if NHI was to pass? You said there's a sort of portion that they can sort of pay, but surely they will be fighting this thing tooth and nail as well, because it's, I mean, they've got employees, they got staff, it's big money there. So I don't know what that implies for them.
Good. So the BHF is the Board of Healthcare Funders. So that represents all the healthcare funders in the country. They were the ones that won the court case with the SAPPF. So they did combine together. We've heard the president saying that he's not going to stop medical funds or medical aids at all. And then, of course, the very next day, Aaron Hotsoledi says, no, that's not the case. So even within government, the left hand is not speaking to the right hand. But, you know, there's just no ways that we have the workforce in the public, all the private sector to just cater for everybody. I mean, if they want to roll out NHI in the way that they envisage, you need a workforce of close to 1 million people. Because if you look at what the workforce is of the NHS, which is not exactly a beacon of hope at the moment, but they are struggling. They've got over 1 million people in the National Health Service in the UK for a similar population. If you add all our nurses, all our doctors in the public and the private sector together, we may be 250,000. So we are 750,000 people short to provide the quality of healthcare that you would expect from private healthcare or even the NHS. So there's just no ways. I mean, SASA did a study about 10 years ago. We're 5,000 anaesthetists short in the country. 5,000. I mean, you guys are struggling now with lists being cut because you don't have anaesthetists to help. We're 5,000 short. Now, if you're going to train 5,000 anaesthetists, you work hard, how many? You're going to have to build 10 medical schools a year, 10 academic hospitals a year, and you're going to have to fill them and train them for 10 to 15 years before you build up 5,000 anaesthetists. But when last did we build a new medical school in this country? So, yeah, I mean, it is complex, but at the moment, all of those people are obviously fighting NHI for obviously their clients. At the moment, we don't think that there's going to be any impact on private healthcare, not for the next 14 to 20 years. But I think there's a lot of capacity and there's a lot of generosity and charity within private healthcare. And, you know, every month we're doing a couple of pro bono cases and we're helping out, and there are people from private that are willing to come and teach and help and everything else. But, you know, that they can't be abused, but there is scope for more public private partnerships, you know, definitely.
Thanks, Dirk. I'm just looking if any other people put their hand up or questions. Not just at the moment. Dirk, maybe I can play devil's advocate and just hear your opinion about that 52111 and the idea of a package of care. I think many of us are misty-eyed for some days gone by when we talked about health for all, and the notion from the Charter from 1955 that we would try and build a society where everyone had access to health. It's obviously the vision of the World Health Organization. And I think as health professions, we would all sign up to that as a goal to try and achieve it. How we get there, we're obviously divided on that. But on this particular issue, if you allow unbridled expenditure on oncology, for example, particularly in the urology space, you can spend actually the GDP of the country on a particular individual, whereas there are other individuals in the country who perhaps are on waiting lists for up to 2 years with a catheter, as an example. So surely it makes sense, and surely our society should be prepared to give up some ground on those philosophical issues to try and accommodate this notion that perhaps to make a more equitable health system, we should be envisioning some capping on expenditure to allow other people to get basic care.
Yeah. So John, I mean, for 4 years of health market inquiry submissions, this was the common theme. Okay. And the Competition Commission, which appointed judges and healthcare experts, came up with very, very good recommendations, which every society in the country has endorsed. And the one thing that they asked for is a supply side regulator, which is exactly what you're talking about. Okay. So when I was at Groote Schuur, we had difficult decisions on a patient that had a rare clotting, disorder. It was going to cost 250,000 Rand. This was back in 2003, 2004 to treat him. And we had a whole ethics meeting and we decided we can't afford it at Groote Schuur. Okay. And he died. Okay. Because that amount of money back then could have treated so many other patients. So a supply side health regulator was core to the health market inquiry endorsements. And we were hoping that the health minister, since 2019, has started to put that in place, because that would have an impact on the private healthcare as well. Okay. So at the moment, the gatekeepers are Discovery. I mean, they will pay for some biologics, and because some biologics, for example, especially in cancer therapy or these rare diseases, make a huge impact for the long-term cost of that patient. But some biologics at R1 million a dose are just unaffordable. So the supply side health regulator would help in that space as well. But the health minister says he doesn't have the money to start a new supply side health regulator. But he's got more than enough money to start appointing boards to the NHI and start with all these other things, because obviously, the cynic in me says he's employing his cronies so that he's making sure that he's taken care of for the rest of his life. So from a supply side health regulator, we definitely need it. But in terms of access to healthcare, I mean, I listened to a talk by Adrian Gore, who's the head of Discovery. And that was before COVID. So it was probably, it was end of 2019. And he was basically sketching with his actuaries what would happen if we didn't have the 9 years of state capture of Zuma. How would the healthcare industry look? So he reckoned that the state capture not only stole billions of rands out of our fiscus, but the main problem with state capture is there wasn't service delivery. And without service delivery, we didn't get economic growth. So if you have 2 to 3% growth in our economy over 9 years, that will translate to between 6 and 7 million new jobs. So for every person that has a job in South Africa, there's 2.5 dependents on a medical aid. So 7 times 2.5 is close to 20 million. 20 to 25 million people. So in the Zuma years, imagine at 2019 when you went into COVID, okay, in early 2020, imagine 20 million more people on medical aid. So 20 million more people on medical aid means that you in the public sector have to deal with half the amount of patients. But also if the country is growing at that rate and there's another 7 million people that are paying tax, then your budget and what you collect in tax revenue doubles. So imagine in 2020, you have half the amount of people to look after in the public sector, but you have double the budget. What would you be doing? you'd be in a completely different space. So the same can be said for BE, and now it's getting a little bit political. Are we going to, look after a small amount of BE, or are we going to grow the economy by 7 million jobs? If there's 7 million new jobs in this country, there aren't enough white people to fill those jobs. But you're going to be employing 6 million other people, 6.5, maybe 6.5 million people. So it's access to healthcare is so entwined into our economy and to politics. But the key to all of this is growth in your economy. So, I mean, that's a long answer, and it's things that obviously I think about all the time, and what we're trying to achieve, within our society and also within our associations. But yeah, these are all valid questions, but the key is, if we cut out corruption, if we start looking after the public health sector, if you start concentrating on service delivery, your economy grows. And if your economy grows, your fiscus grows, and fewer people have to use the public health sector.
Perhaps just a last question, something that you said surprised me a little bit. I thought that once the NHI bill was signed into law last year, that would be the dire cost. But you seem to say there is a mechanism through the courts to allow that to be sent back for reconsideration. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, that's how we see it. So if we prove that the president did not do his job properly, so he did not do his due diligence, and he signed something into law that was unconstitutional, then it can be reviewed. So his decision is reviewed. So once his decision is reviewed, then it has to go back to the process that it was before he signed, which is back to Parliament. So I think that is the focus of all the court actions, is to get it back into Parliament. And once it's back into Parliament, with the ANC's only got a 30% representativity at the moment, then whatever comes out of Parliament will be very, very different. Because the only reason why they got it unchanged from basically 2007 to 2023 was because they had a majority and everybody toed the line. So there is a way to reverse it for sure. Okay, any other questions, guys?
Surprised the audience so quiet. I'm sure you have perceived this, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if as a registrar or public sector doctor, you focus on passing exams and what's going to happen next. And, you think, what's going to happen to us going forward. I mean, in our society, the three presidents that took over after me, Bruce Pickard, Lance Layson, and Caroline Corbett, they all immigrated. They're all gone. Okay. So the threat is that you will go, but I mean, I've worked in other healthcare systems in the world, and I don't want to go anywhere else. Yeah, I think whenever you have uncertainty, then people are going to worry, so I think that the sooner we get certainty about NHI, the sooner the future of the country can decide where they're going to practice, what they're going to do, how they're going to build. But that's why we think this Gazette 52111 is really just killing innovation and healthcare in this country. Okay, so stick around. I'm sticking around.
Nice positive note to end on. Just to thank you again for coming to Urology Forum. It's been such a educative morning, so thank you. And we've got something to say. Thank you for your contribution. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. So we'll meet again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We just close here.